Disclaimer, I've already made this video in a sense. I've spoken on this topic in my first ever video, however I decided to remake it because I feel I didn't cover enough ground in that video, and there is more to say on this topic. Also, the quality of that video is bad, don't watch it. Also, disclaimer, before you go off in the comments, I suggest you listen to what I have to say first and then make up your mind based on my points and the evidence I present. You might be thinking, no shit, but I get the feeling it needs to be explicitly stated. Spider-Man Homecoming is not a Peter Parker movie. Now don't get me wrong, I'm not calling it a bad movie or even an average one. It's great, truly. As a piece of entertainment, it's amazing, bringing a new generation into the character of Spider-Man and giving us an awesome villain. I've seen takes on this website talking about how it isn't necessarily a good Spider-Man movie, and while I agree, it's a well-made movie with interesting characters and very cool action. But what it isn't is a Peter Parker movie. It's a Miles Morales movie. When Spider-Man Homecoming came out, one of the writers on the movie, Jonathan Goldstein, said this in an interview. This was the first Marvel movie that kind of had to justify its existence in a way. Up till now, they were usually breaking new ground, putting new actors in the roles. This was one that's been done 5 times before in 2 different incarnations, so we came in feeling that sense of like, okay, how can we reinvent this? What have we seen? Let's make a checklist of all the things you've seen in all the other movies, and let's not do those. Let's not have him swing by web through Manhattan. There's nothing wrong with adapting a character to movies or other media and tweaking parts for said adaptation, as long as it sticks with the spirit of the character. For example, I don't mind that Peter has biological webbing in the Raimi movies, but Batman being a straight up murderer is puzzling at best. But when it comes to movies, it's shown that Peter Parker as a character does work when done well. The Raimi movies did a great job of developing Peter, and the Mark Webb movies, less so. I do not believe you need to reinvent a character purely because it has been done before. Specifically because this reinvention of Peter is less of a reinvention and more so them taking elements of Miles Morales and shoving them into this movie. Now, stay with me one second. What are the basics we know about Peter Parker? He has an Aunt May, usually portrayed as an older woman. His Uncle Ben's death shaped him as a person and is the anchor for what he does, as he constantly goes back to it in his mind. He can be considered sort of a loner at times, but his 2 most well-known friends are Harry Osborn and Mary Jane Watson. He has a high school bully named Flash Thompson. He made his Spider-Man suits and his gadgets himself. He goes to a normal school. Cool! Now, what are the basics we know about Miles Morales? His parents are Jefferson Davis and Rio Morales. He has a nerdy best friend named Genki Lee. He once dated a girl and her parents turned out to be Hydra members. His initial suit was a Spider-Man Halloween costume, but soon after his new suit and web shooters were given to him by S.H.I.E.L.D. He goes to a school that specializes in science. Awesome. Now the last part. What are the basics we know about MCU Peter Parker? He has an Aunt May who appears a lot younger than portrayed in other media. Something seemed to happen with his Uncle Ben, however that character is never mentioned in favor of Tony Stark being the father-mentor role. He has a nerdy best friend named Ned Leeds. He took a girl to the homecoming dance whose dad turned out to be the Vulture. He has a high school bully named Flash Thompson. While he made his original suit and web shooters, his main suit and web shooters were given to him by Tony Stark. He goes to a school that specializes in science. Okay, now, who would you say MCU Peter is objectively closer to? Miles, right? In the same interview I referenced earlier, writer Jonathan Goldstein also said of the movie, "Let's not do Uncle Ben's death, because everybody knows. Yes, it's a sad backstory, but we don't have to revisit it." And I get that. I really do. It's like the Batman's parents of Marvel. But it is a little weird to have almost 0 references whatsoever. The one vague, and I mean vague, reference being that when Peter tells Ned not to tell May he's Spider-Man because of all she's been through. Would it have been so difficult to just say, "since we lost my uncle," instead? Not really. I'm not asking for a dramatic death scene, but having nothing in the first movie of this Spider-Man's career is disappointing at best. The movie almost treats it like Uncle Ben never existed and transposes the father figure element onto Tony Stark, which we do not need. Now, onto Peter's friends. Something this movie does is take names of characters and creates whole new characters, but only using the names. So Betty Brant isn't working at the Daily Bugle, but instead a student at Peter's school, along with Ned Leeds, who also doesn't work at the Bugle. I don't care when it comes to this. Like I said earlier, if it works better than make them students, then go for it. But Ned Leeds is so far from his comic counterpart that he is based on a completely different character, Genki Lee. See if this sounds familiar. Genki Lee is Miles Morales' best friend, who discovers Miles Morales is Spider-Man after Miles demonstrates his powers in their shared dorm room and begs Genki not to tell anyone. Genki is a huge fan of Lego and superheroes and encourages Miles to be Spider-Man. Now you might be thinking, these are all things teenagers are interested in. It's too broad to say it's a ripoff. Buddy, the scene where Ned finds out Peter's identity is a direct translation of the scene where Genki finds out Miles' identity. It's right there, even to Ned dropping his Lego Death Star to him touching his Lego and it exploding to demonstrate his powers. This is so whack that even Brian Michael Bendis, creator of Miles Morales, spoke out on the topic, saying this. I'll be very honest right now, I have not talked about this publicly, but it feels very bizarre. Most of the time the characters I've had a hand in creating that have made it to the screen, from Jessica Jones all the way up to Maria Hill and Quake, the level of quality of the adaptation and care in which they bring the character forward past the adaptation into its new life has been uniformly amazing. My luck in this area has been second to none. I've not seen Spider-Man Homecoming, so I'm going to wait until we see what we see. But yeah, it was bizarre and flattering. I don't even know if Genki was the inspiration, or they just got to their own place with a character like this on their own. I don't know. It does seem like it might have been, but no one's told me either way. There's so much else in that trailer that's from Ultimate Spider-Man that I would assume that yes, it is. It's weird only because Genki wasn't a part of Peter's story, he was a part of Miles' story. If you don't believe it from the creator of the character himself, I don't know what I can tell you. Brian even went as far as to include Ned as an alias that Genki uses, with another character remarking that Genki doesn't look like a Ned. It's not only Genki that's taken from Miles, however. Peter also attends a school that specializes in science, like Miles, has a crush on a girl whose parents turn out to be a villain, similar to Miles' and Ultimate Kate Bishop relationship, Peter getting his suit from Tony Stark instead of making it himself, the main suit, I mean, just like Miles getting his suit from S.H.I.E.L.D., but it's unrealistic to have Peter make his own costume. Don't talk to me about realism in a universe with a talking raccoon.
12%? It's real!
They could have made it work, but they used the Miles route instead. These examples are clear as day, and no matter what way you twist it, this movie has Miles' DNA all over it. It's representation though! Are you saying Peter's friends should be Harry and Mary Jane, who are both white in the comics? I'm saying, and bear with me on this, Peter's friends should be Peter's friends, Harry and Mary Jane. No one is holding a gun to anyone's head in terms of casting those two as white. Wait, hold that thought. Zendaya plays Michelle Jones, a character who appears bookish, snarky, and the story seems to hint toward her being Peter's long-term love interest. Okay, cool. No complications there whatsoever.
My friends call me MJ.
Okay, right. So Zendaya is MJ, but not Mary Jane. The official explanation from Kevin Feige is, she's not Mary Jane Watson. She never was Mary Jane Watson. She was always this new high school character, Michelle, who we know there's an M in Michelle and an M in Mary. Ha 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 ha. He laughed in it. So we're clever and we thought, wouldn't it be neat if her initials were MJ? And then I think it leaked that she would be playing MJ, and it became a whole headache for Zendaya to have to navigate. It was never a big, oh my god, it's a big reveal. There are big reveals in the movie, that's not one of them. So this is whack. It's another example of how different they're trying to make this, but for no apparent reason other than audiences want a different Spider-Man. But the fact her being MJ was such a big deal should show you that they're interested in these characters. Picture, if you can, a Batman movie where a new young character shows up. Call him like John or something. Then have him at the end of the movie say, my friends call me Robin. Wouldn't that be so
You should use your full name. I like that name. Robin.
Ah, crap. Still though, Zendaya is the first actor that I've seen that I consider to be perfect for Mary Jane Watson. I do not care if she doesn't have red hair. There's more to the character than that. Mary Jane is as important to the story of Spider-Man as Aunt May. Marvel being non-committal and saying, oh no, she's not Mary Jane, she's MJ, I mean Michelle, comes off as them being scared to cast a black woman as Mary Jane. So, in Homecoming, you've never explicitly mentioned Uncle Ben, used Miles' friends in place of Peter's friends, and created a new love interest for Peter. The question I have is, why the hell is this movie not about Miles Morales? The movie seems tailor-made for Miles, but with Peter forced in. They're trying to have their cake and eat it too, using elements from Miles' comic, but with Peter as the lead. My question is, when they eventually make a live-action Miles, how do you adapt his comics now that this movie already did it? How do you put the real Genki Lee in a movie without the audiences that these screenwriters envision not being interested? I'll say it again, this isn't a Peter Parker movie. But you don't need to directly adapt the comic books. I am aware of that. I am saying you do not need to use Miles' best friend, remove Peter's supporting cast, put him in a special science school, take out any mention of Uncle Ben, and take out Peter's agency and his costume design to make a good Spider-Man story. You need to nowadays. The other movies have done everything you can with Peter's story. No, they haven't. You know how I know? Insomniac's Spider-Man game. That game managed to reinvent parts of the character while keeping elements recognizable, and you know what? You know what really sticks? Insomniac Peter Parker has Aunt May, portrayed as an older woman. His Uncle Ben's death shaped him as a person and is the anchor for what he does as he constantly goes back to it in his mind. His two best friends are Harry Osborn and Mary Jane Watson. He had a high school bully named Flash Thompson. He made his Spider-Man suit and his gadgets himself, and he went to a normal high school. But the games had more time to tell its story than the movies do. True, but that doesn't explain why they didn't just use the elements of Peter's story that I mentioned instead of copy and pasting a Miles Morales comic. Or why, after custom building that movie for Miles, not just using him instead of another Peter Parker movie, since audiences are apparently so Spider-Man saturated that they needed to change it to that degree. It is really disappointing and part of the reason I'm not as invested in the MCU Spider-Man anymore. I remember prior to the Sony Marvel deal being announced, thinking about the possibilities of what they could do with the character in the universe, but putting Peter in Miles' world is the weirdest possible scenario. Miles deserves better than this. Thank you for watching. Let me know what you guys think of all this. I'm sorry you had to sit through another video where I talk about why Miles should get a movie like he isn't getting one in a few months, but I needed to make this so I could get the idea out. Check out my socials down below, and I'll see you next time.